friends, what's going on? So in today's video, I'm going to show you the step-by-step process of building your very first app. I'm going to show you how to build a journaling app using one of my favorite no-code tools called Glide. And I created this video specifically for anyone who has never ever built an app before, or even maybe not even thought about building an app. And I'm going to show you how easy it is to get started, even if you don't have a technical background. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to build the app, and then you can just go and rebuild it in your own time. And the idea is that by rebuilding what I'm doing, you'll kind of get the hang of how tools like Glide work, and that will then set up a solid foundation for you to kind of go out and build whatever it is that you want to build. Okay, so before we get started, go to glide.com, or I'll leave a link in the description down below, and create an account. You can build this app that I'm going to be showing you today on their free plan, so just jump straight into it. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to start off with the absolute basics, which is to create a new app and to create functionality that will allow you to add or update information in your app. So what are we going to do? As soon as you've created your account, we're going to click on new app, and then we're going to choose blank. Now, there'll be a few other options like Google Sheets and Airtable and a whole bunch of other things, but we'll be dealing with that in a future video. Just select blank and get started. Now, if you are brand new to building apps, there are typically three main components that you want to keep in mind. You've got the data, which is essentially your database that will store all of the information related to your app. Then you will have the interface or layout of your app. So that is anything that your users will end up using to interact with your app. And then you also have logic. And so that can be certain automations and workflows that might trigger certain things after a certain action is taken. For example, if a user, for example, adds a new journal entry, you might want to send yourself a notification by email. And that is where something like logic or action comes into play. Now, when you open Glide for the very first time, you're going to be directed to the layout section. And this is really where we're going to be creating the interface of our app. Now, just a quick note about Glide. When you create a Glide app, your users will be able to download the app onto their phone, and you'll be able to send them notifications. But not just is it something that they'll be able to use on their phone, there'll also be the web app version of it, which means that you'll be able to send people to a page like this, and people will be able to interact with your app on a Google Chrome browser. Okay, so with that being said, typically first step in all of this is just to give your app a name. So I'm going to call this Journally. I don't know. You can change the icon. You can do whatever it is that you want with all of that. And then you can also choose your color. I'm a big fan of the purple, so I'm just going to stick with it. And then from here, you're pretty much good to go. We'll circle back to some of the other stuff in a future video, but for now, all you want to do is just give your app a name and then select whatever color and icon you want. Okay, so typically when you're building an app, the very first thing that I like to do is think about the information that will be used in my app. And because we're building a journaling app, what we will need to do is store journal entries into our database. So that's the first thing that we're going to do. We're going to head over to the data tab. And in the data tab, you're going to see that we already have two tables. One is the users table, and the users table will contain all of the people who sign up to use your app. And then we have another table which is currently empty, and it's called empty table. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to rename this table to journal entries. And in here, we are going to be storing any entry that any of our users make. Now, if you've never seen a database tool before, it's super simple. Think of it as a Google Sheet where you'll be able to store different information. If you've never used Google Sheets before, think of it as something like a phone book that contains certain structured information like the name of the business and their phone number. That is essentially what we're doing here. If we go and have a look at the users table, you can see that the users has a name, has an email address, and sometimes you can even upload a profile picture. Same thing applies here. We'll have a journals entry table, and in our journals entry table, we're going to need to configure fields that we're going to need to store our information. So what kind of information will we need to store inside of our journaling app? So the first thing that I would add is a field for the message that is stored. So I come into the app, I add my journal entry, I hit the submit button, and so the message that I create will now be stored in here. What's another field that might be relevant to a journal entry? Now, obviously we might want to be able to tell when we put the journal entry in there. So what we'll also need to add is a created date field. And in Glide, besides using text fields, you can also select a whole bunch of additional types of fields. And the field that we want to work with in this particular instance is a date time field. Okay. And so the idea is now that when a user comes in, they can just add a message. So they can say something like, this is a journal entry. And then it will automatically add the date that they added the post. And this is what the entry will look like in our database. Okay, so let's go ahead now that we have our database set up and create the functionality that will allow us to add a journal entry. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch the layouts tab, and I'm going to switch it to mobile view, but you can also do this in your web app as well. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the interface that, for starters, displays all of the journal entries that were made, but also allows me to add new journal entries. And so the way that we can do that is we can navigate our way over to the components section in our Glide app, and we can now go and add a collection. Now, a collection is essentially a view of your database. And so we've got two tables. We've got the users table and we've got the journal entry table. And what we want to display in our app are our journal entries. And so what we can do is we can either choose the card view, the list view, table view, grid view, checklist, Kanban, calendar, whatever it is that we want. And so just for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to add the list view. Now, by default, it's just going to choose whatever database it finds. So in this case, it found the users table. What I want to do is I want to switch it from the users table to the journal entries table. And the way that I can do that is by going over to the data tab and changing the source of the information from users to journal entries. And just like that, you can now see that the information in my journals entry table is now being displayed. Now, what we can do now is we can start configuring what this interface looks like. So for starters, one thing that we might not want is our journal entry twice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the second one. But one thing that I do think is missing is our time when we added our entry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click into the meta field, and now I can select any of the fields inside of my database. And the field that I want to select in this case is the created date field. And just like that, you can see now that I've got my journal entry and I've got my date time. Now, it has also populated my image field, and so this here is where you'll be able to add your image, but I'm going to simply remove the created date field from my image field, and it now looks like this. And so now whenever a user adds a new journal entry, so we're going to say this is the second one, and we'll go and add a new date in here, it will automatically appear in our list. Now, obviously, as our users get access to our app, they won't be writing their journal entries directly into our database, which means we actually now need to configure something that will allow them to add the journal entries themselves. And by default, what Glide will do when you add a new collection is it will add a set of default actions. And the default actions are: 1, the ability to allow users to add items, and 2, the ability to allow users to edit items. So let's talk about the first one, adding items. Now, as you may have noticed, there's a big plus button that has been added up there. This is the default action that allows users to add items. So if I disabled that, you'll see that the plus button disappears. But obviously we want to allow our users to add items, so we're actually just going to leave it in there. Now, if we click on this button, you'll see that a little pop-up appears. And this pop-up has by default 2 fields added to it. 1, the message field, and then the created date field. And so if we go back into our journal entries database or our table, you can see that it's automatically pulled in the 2 fields that we have added to our database. So now if I as a user type in, this is my 3rd journal entry, and we'll just select the date here, you'll see that it automatically gets added. And so that is the basics of adding data to our database as a user. Now you may have also noticed these 3 dots next to our entry. If we click on that, you'll see that there's an edit button. What the user will be able to do here is they'll be able to edit the entry. So what I can say here, this is an edited journal entry. And when they submit it, you'll immediately see these updates in the app. Okay. And so again, if you want to allow your users to edit their records, you can leave it just as it is. But if you don't want to allow them to edit it, you can just simply disable it in the Actions tab like that. Okay, so those are the basics. If you wanted, you could also allow users to delete their items. And the way that that will work is when they click on the 3 dots and then click on delete, it will just automatically delete their entry from the database and it will no longer be displayed. And so these are great actions to use to get started. So just enable or disable whatever it is that you want. Now, so far what I've shown you is how this functionality works if there's one user. And up here you can see that I'm currently viewing this app as Connor Finlayson. But what happens if another person signs up? So let's go and call this person Sally Test. Okay. Now, as it's a journal entry app, I might not want to be able to see another user's journal entries. So if I now view the app as Sally Test, you can see that she also sees my entries. So what we're going to need to do next is set up a functionality that allows us to only display journal entries made by the person that we're currently logged in as. And so the way that we can do that is by configuring our data table to also include who the user is that added the journal entry. So how do we do this? What we're going to do is we're going to add a new field and we're going to call this field user ID. And what we're going to populate this with is the email address of the user that added the data. So in this case, both of these entries were made by me, Connor@unicornfactory.nz. Now that I have that, I can now create what's called a relation between the journal entries table and the users table. And essentially what a relations field does is link both data tables together, and you can then use it to display certain data based on, for example, someone being logged in. And this is how it works. The first thing is that we want to create our link by creating our relation. So what we're going to do is I'm going to create a field called user/relation, and I'm going to then look up a relation type. Now what this allows me to do is to basically set up a rule how the tables are linked to each other. And what I want to do is I want to say, hey, link the user table to the journals entry table when the user ID field, which contains my email address, matches the email field in the user table. Just like that. And now you can see how it automatically looks up the user. Now, the reason why this is so powerful is because now if I make any changes inside of my user table, for example, let's change the name to Connor Test, I don't have to manually make these changes in the relations table anymore because it uses the relationship between both tables to automatically import any information that might be in that related table. Okay. And so the same thing applies here. If I, for example, add a role like admin and I want to reference this later on, I can use what's called a lookup table to pull information from the users table into the journal entry table. And so let's have a little look at this. We're going to go in here and we'll go user/role. And we're going to say look up, and then we can say look up the relation column. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pick the record inside of our journal entries table called user relation. And now we can just pull any value from there. So in this case, we're going to pull the role field and you'll see it automatically now displays admin. And again, just to bring this point home, if I changed it from admin to employee, instead of having to manually change it inside of the journal entries table, it just automatically updates. And so that's something really powerful that you can do. Now, as you can see, the relationship between the journal entries and users table only works one way right now. So at the moment, we're only pulling a user into the journal entries table, but we can do this in reverse as well. So if we want to create a relationship where we pull in all journal entries made by a user into the users table, then we can pretty much do the same thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to go journals, and then we're going to go records or entries or whatever it is that you want to call it. And once again, we're going to use our relation field, and we're going to say, hey, display all of the records inside of the journal entries table where the email address, so in this case, con@unicornfactory.nz, matches the value inside of the journal entries table under the user ID field. And because a user can have multiple journal entries, we want to enable match multiple, just like that. Okay. And so now we've created a two-way relationship between the users table and the journals entries table. Okay, so if we go back to our layout table, we can still see now that our journals entry table is showing Connor's journal entries to Sally. So what we need to do now is we actually need to configure our journal entries source. So we're going to click on our table, and then we're going to head over to the source table. And what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to where it says user profile. And what that does is it selects the logged in user. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to reference the journal records field inside of our users table. And now you can see that this is empty because Sally hasn't made an entry yet. But if we switch back to Connor, you can see that the entries that Connor made are still there. And so this is how we can create unique user apps where users can add and update and display information related to them. Now, there's one last little thing that we need to do, and that is that when we add a new record, we actually also need to specify who the user is that submitted the record. And so what we're going to need to do is, once again, just configure our app. So we're going to allow them to add the message field. So I'm just going to make that large. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add some special columns. One is for the created date time field. So we're going to just type in current, and it will display the current date time. And that will essentially pull in the date and time of that is right now. And so we're going to, whatever that date and time is right now, we want to store inside of our created date field inside of our journals table, like that. Now, another thing that we want to automatically populate is the email address of the person that is currently logged in. And the way that we can retrieve that information is once again through a special component, which is called a values from user profile. And if we go down here, you can see that you actually have access to all of the fields inside of the user profile table. And the one that we want to reference is the email address. And what we want to say is, hey, whenever someone submits this, take the email address of the person that submitted it and store it inside of one of our columns in the journal entries table. And the column that we want to save it in is the user ID field. So how does this look in practice now? So if I come in here and I go, this is an entry by Sally, what I'm expecting to happen is the second I hit the submit button, that it takes the current date time and stores that inside of my created date column. And it takes my email address, because that's who I'm logged in right now, and stores that in the user ID table. So let's check out what happens. We're going to hit submit. You can see that my entry has appeared. And now if I go to the data table, you can see that my journal entry has appeared here, but also in the journal entries table, there's a new record where it has my message, the created date time, and the email address of the logged in user. And so now when we switch between different users, you can see that everyone's interface is going to be different. And so that is basically the first version of our app. Okay, so in this video, you've learned how to set up the ability to add and update and delete data inside of our database. You've learned how to display it, and you've not only learned how to display everyone's data, you've learned how to display user-specific data. Now, the only last thing to do is to publish your app. So you can just click on publish, and then just click on the publish. You can give it a unique name if you want, and then you can hit the publish button. And what you'll be able to do now is download the app onto your phone just by getting your phone, scanning the QR code. You can also send your QR code to friends, and then they'll be able to either use it on their phones or on the app. So that's it for this video. My recommendation is to just rebuild what I did step by step. And then in a future video, I'm going to show you how you can add even more awesome features. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments down below. Other than that, I'll see you back here for the next one. Bye.